Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Hi, Shantae. How are you? So glad to have you on. Thank you again for joining. So, I am Heather Henley, your Master Crisis Therapist, CEO of H&S Consulting Services, and CEO of HeatherHenley.com. Here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I am the author of I Am an Orange Uncompromisingly. And so I am so happy that you all are able to join me on this evening for Teachable Moments with Heather Henley. I definitely wanted to recap just some of the things that we talked about really quickly on last week. I promise I'm not going to hold you more than 15 or 20 minutes on this evening, but I just wanted to be able to help along with emotional roller coasters, being able to stabilize our emotions. And so on last week, we just talked about emotions, and I gave the definition, excuse me, I gave the definition of emotions, which is a natural, instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstance, mood, or relationship with others. And so we pretty much talked about just 8 of the emotions that individuals kind of deal with on a daily basis, and the emotions that come quickly. We usually experience them all in a matter of 10 or 15 minutes when we experience some type of trauma or stress. And so those emotions that I identified last week was trust, joy, anticipation, anger, disgust, sadness, and fear and surprise. And so as it pertains to those, the thing that we talked about last week was mindfulness as being just one of those indicators of stabilizing our emotions. And so mindfulness was the practice of being fully aware and present in the moment. And it's important that when we are dealing with emotions that we want to make sure that we are in the moment and we're dealing with that particular situation. So that is in the moment. The second, and so under the mindfulness, I talked about 3 elements, which was acknowledging the situation, of being fully aware and present in the moment, by acknowledging the situation and the emotions that you are actually feeling, thinking about what you could say to yourself, or thinking of some positive self-talks to decrease whatever type of anxieties you're feeling behind the emotions. Second was situation setting. And so with situation setting, it was looking at where am I, who am I with, what's happening, and what are the things that's going on. And then lastly, it's about emotional outcomes. And so those are the things that we talked about on last week. But for this week, we are going to talk about distress tolerance. So that's going to be our second main point when we are talking about stabilizing our emotions or coming off of an emotional roller coaster. We are talking about stabilizing our emotions. And so in order to do that, the next step would be the distress tolerance. And so we know, as it pertains to distress tolerance, the definition of a distress tolerance is how do you tolerate the pain in difficult situations even though you can't change it? That's a distress tolerance. How do you tolerate pain in difficult situations even though you are unable to change it? And so as I begin to kind of think about a distress tolerance, we understand and know that we have emotions and different situations that occur all the time. But even in the last point that I made on the mindfulness, the important thing is our response of it, or how do we handle it? And so what we realize is that when we are talking about any type of distress or any type of emotion that we have experienced, we are trying to look at the intensity of the pain and how do we handle it. How do we handle the pain that we are experiencing at that moment? So we are definitely looking at all of those things. And so as I began to think about it, as we talk about a distress tolerance, and we are trying to handle stressful situations or traumas that we experience, it took me back to when I was having my son. And so I've had two children. And so my first child that I had, I was in labor for 20 hours. And so at that time, you know, I was much younger. I was in my 20s. I was 20, as a matter of fact. And so I thought that I was so strong. So I had my son with no medication, 0. And so we're talking about a distress tolerance. So I had him with no medication. However, I was able to take a class which they call Lamaze class prior to me having my son. And in the Lamaze class that I took, they taught us how to channel the pain. That was how we were able to, with our mind, perceive the pain to a different place. And it was all based on a mindset of how I interpreted the pain, how I looked at it, you know, how I felt about it. And so in the Lamaze class, we were taught that we wanted to be able to channel the pain. And so when the pain would come, I had to replace the pain with different types of emotions or feelings, or I wanted to replace the pain with a different thought or a happy thought. I needed to go to a happy place, almost like a meditation for the Lamaze. I had to do deep breathing, relaxation techniques. I had to tap into coping skills that I had learned during the Lamaze classes. And so again, we're talking about a distress tolerance, how to tolerate pain in difficult situations when you know that there is no change, when you know that you have no control over it. And that goes back to mindfulness, acknowledging the whole entire situation and the emotion that you're feeling at that time. So as I began to go into labor, what I had to do was, when the pain came, when the contractions came, when the intensity came, when the urge came, when it felt as though I was going to die, when I felt my heart beating fast, when I began to sweat, when I wanted to cry because the pain was so unbearable, I began to calm myself and breathe. And so when I started breathing, I started counting backwards: 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Even as I was breathing, I began to focus my mind on things more positive. And so because I was already practicing ahead of time, even though I didn't know what the pain was going to feel like, I didn't even know how to perceive the pain that was coming, because it was something that I had never experienced before. So in my time of preparing for the pain, in my time of preparing for it, I was practicing and learning scriptures. I was telling myself that I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. My favorite scripture was, though they slay me, yet would I trust him. I just began to flood my mind with more positive thoughts. So every time the pain came, and each time a contraction came, if you're a mother, you would understand this, the pain felt a little different. But every time the pain came, I would breathe, I would take in breaths. And as I was blowing out of my mind, acknowledging the situation that I was in, I began to self-talk or say some positive things about myself. I began to tell myself that I could handle it, that I could take this. I began to say that this is temporary. This is a temporal situation. And so I'm in a temporary situation of pain, but I'm going to get something that's permanent, a permanent blessing out of the pain that I was having at that time. So again, we're talking about a distress tolerance. And so when we are dealing with emotions or traumas or distressors that are brought on, as I stated before, when we talk about the definition of emotion, which is a natural instinctive state of mind deriving from my circumstance, my mood, or relationships with others, it makes me to understand that I have to be mindful of the situation, and then I have to be ready for the distress tolerance. So again, I wanted to just say how to tolerate pain in difficult situations when there is no change. And so I just wanted to give that example in terms of being able to handle just those stressful situations that individuals may encounter on a day-to-day basis, that when pain comes, or the pain from the situation, the traumatic experience, that we have to make sure that we have already prepared ourselves, or that we're already ready for the pain, for any type of pain that life may bring us. And this is why I stated that I went through a class. And in that class, it prepared me for the pain that I was to endure, the pain that I was about to come into contact with, although I didn't even know what the pain was going to feel like. I went to a breast cancer awareness probably a couple of months ago, and one of my sorority sisters, her name is Jewel, she talked about how when situations come, they don't give you prior notice. When the blows come, when the pain comes, it just doesn't give you prior notice. It doesn't give you an opportunity to say, hey, I think I want to deal with this, or I don't want to deal with this. And so when we're talking about that distress tolerance, when we're talking about how to tolerate the pain in difficult situations, even though we know that we can't change it, that it's right here, that it just fell in our lap, we have to make sure that we have prepared ourselves, and that on a daily basis, before pain becomes an issue, before we have any type of traumatic experiences, before distresses come our way, that we have already prepared ourselves by making sure that we are taking in positivity in our spirit. The things that we're looking at, the things that we're talking about, we want to make sure, that we are able to have the positivity in us, so that you will be able to endure the contractions, as I stated. And so although the pain was pretty extensive, and I was in labor for 20 hours. So can you imagine being in pain for 20 hours straight and being able to handle that type of pain, knowing that the only way that it was going to change was when I gave birth? That's when the pain was actually going to stop. Let's talk about it. When I gave birth. And then even giving birth, I still had a different type of pain. But during the painful experiences, or during the contractions that I was having, I had to be ready, even though I didn't know how the pain was going to feel. I was scared, I was nervous, I was fearful, because I didn't know what to expect. But what I did know is that I had already prepared myself. I had took that Lamaze class. And I had sat through weeks of Lamaze, learning how to breathe and able to control the pain that I was experiencing. Because actually the pain was behind me. I was actually in front of the pain. When the pain began to come, I was able to start breathing, and then I was able to speak positive things into my situation,